I'm now porn adjacent. I run a tabletop game stream regularly with some porn stars, which you can check out with suitable precautions in place at tabletopless.org. And just know that I put as much effort into this campaign as I would any other tits or no tits. Do I want my expectations to be subverted in the media that I consume? Lots of people don't seem to want their expectations to be subverted. Other people do, and there's definitely a divide between the two. Sometimes it's appropriate to do so, sometimes it's not appropriate to do so, and yet people seem to insist on doing it where it's not appropriate. The expectations that we have in storytelling, a lot of people have fumbled around trying to understand them, trying to get a hook on them, a grasp on them. Campbell's hero with 1,000 faces, the Jungian archetypes. If you examine mythology, if you look at mythology, you do see the same sorts of stories over and over and over and over and over again. The hero rising up from nothing, evildoers getting their comeuppance, somewhat cartoonish sketches of good and evil, right and wrong, bad and good. This is how we tell ourselves what our morality is. This is how we explain it, and it turns a key in our heads. Certain stories seem to hook in to certain receptors, if you will, in our storytelling brains. But that can be frustrating because it is so often the same story again and again and again. And if you are a storyteller, if you are creative, you may well end up getting frustrated by that. Now, a mass audience likes a feel-good tale. There's some good footage of Kurt Vonnegut talking about stories, rise, fall, rise again, it's a good sell. Someone from a bad situation getting to a good situation. These are things that are easy to sell to people, stories that often do well. The mass audience is more likely to be attracted to those kinds of tales, those kind of stereotypes, those kind of tropes. Tropes are tropes for a reason, after all. Mythology is so common in its themes for a reason. These are fundamental, innate human characteristics to like these kinds of stories, and for most people that's enough. They find it affirming, they find it uplifting, they find it reinforces their underlying values. If you want to do something more experimental, if you want to subvert expectations, then you're going to find yourself with a much smaller, more minor audience, not that mass audience. You generally, this isn't always true, none of this is hard and fast true, but generally you can't achieve that kind of grand success if you're not tapping into these primal tropes, if you're not tapping into these ideas, if you're not leaving people feeling good as they exit a story, even horror films. There's a tendency for creators who get frustrated with telling the same stories over and over again to become pretentious and a bit whack, and to create things for that more rarefied audience of other creators who will appreciate the subtleties and the tweaks and the pretentious bits and bobs here and there. But most people aren't necessarily going to be into that, and they're not going to like having their expectations subverted. They like conventional stories for a reason, and that seems to be because it hooks into this primal set of storytelling receptors that we have in our brain. To most people, a £3 bottle of wine and a £12 bottle of wine aren't that different. You really have to be a sommelier or showing off to pretend that there's a difference.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
Probably the most hated thing on this list and probably the least contentious to talk about when we're talking about a misfiring of subverting expectations, is The Last Jedi. And The Last Jedi really brought that term, subverting expectations, to a lot of people's notice. Subverting expectations in Star Wars was never going to be a good idea. The original Star Wars trilogy is all built on plagiarism. It's a syncretic myth, bringing together Eastern ideas, Western ideas, bringing together the old serials like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and so forth, with Kurosawa films and other things that George Lucas loved. You would also see this kind of theme explored in the whole Indiana Jones series as well. Star Wars is mythology. It's a story, but it taps into all of those tropes that we were talking about that really hook into these primal centers in our brains: good versus evil, right versus wrong, black versus white. There was a clear moral arc and message throughout the original Star Wars films, and they were not trying to be pretentious or to do anything groundbreaking and new, save in effects and so forth. Digitally controlled cameras and so on, and later on in the unfortunate prequel sequel, which now look brilliant by comparison, the complete and total overuse of CGI. Yeah, it happens. But Star Wars it's a syncretic myth. It taps into those archetypes, that hero of 1,000 faces. It uses older storytelling methods and uses mythology as inspiration, as well as those things that Lucas enjoyed in an uncomplicated fashion when he was younger. People don't go to Star Wars to have their expectations subverted. They go to see that myth up on the screen, those broad tropes up on the screen. They want their expectations to be fulfilled, not to be subverted. And The Last Jedi absolutely and utterly failed to do that, while also aggravating people by violating canon and being part of an ongoing process of the destruction of the old lore, which, hooked fans. You wouldn't have needed to know all the details, but people who knew the details appreciate the odd nod and wink and so on. Star Wars is broad strokes, it's uncomplicated. Heroes and villains, good and evil, like I've said. So you don't go to that looking for anything complicated. Something more nuanced, more morally grey and so on, can be spun off from the main series. The only other really good film out of the new Star Wars, the Disney Star Wars, was Rogue One, which is very grim and quite nasty in a lot of ways, and subverted expectations, certainly, but did it in a better way than The Last Jedi did. I think because it tapped into a different set of well-known mythologies, those of the war film, the Dirty Dozen, and so forth. But that one worked, where the rest of them didn't. And of the new Star Wars films, The Last Jedi is the least successful, because it tried to subvert people's expectations. It's like the director was frustrated by the fact that they had to work within the bounds of Star Wars, and whoever was in control of the project gave them too much latitude to move against that and to subvert expectations and to do something different. What should have been some sort of retread of Empire became a wrecking ball before the new series of films had even really gotten off the ground properly. The first film, of course, was too predictable. It was a retread. It was just A New Hope over again, almost shot for shot in some cases. Perhaps that goes some way to explaining the shift for the subversion of expectations that went on with The Last Jedi. But it doesn't make it excusable, and it doesn't make it work. And then the third film was damaged by the second film as it scrambled too fast to make up for the damage, to correct the course. The first film should have been familiar, it should have rhymed, it shouldn't have been shot for shot. The second film should not have subverted people's expectations in such a way because it just wrecked the entire franchise. And then the third film could not make up the damage. as always, it takes twice as long to fix a problem or debunk nonsense as it does to spew the nonsense in the first place. And unfortunately, that seems to have been pretty much the death knell for the franchise, at least as a culturally domineering force. If you want to subvert expectations, this is the last place you want to do it. Because Star Wars is pure, distilled, primal mythology.
I'm gonna find. And I'm gonna kill. Every last one of them.
The Last of Us 2 is much more divisive on this basis than The Last Jedi was. People are split between those who seem to be regarding it as a stunning and brave event game, and those who feel that it delivered stuff that nobody asked for and nobody wanted. I didn't get on with the first game. Well, I did up until the ending. It was part of a whole theme of bad endings, like Mass Effect and so on, for a while there. I felt that Joel's actions at the end didn't make any sense, meant there was no character arc, no story arc, no development of the character. At the end, he was willing to let the world burn for the sake of someone who wasn't even his daughter. I raged at the illogic, the irrationality of it. How many other people would lose their sons and daughters and so on because he made that decision, that bad, stupid, wrong decision, which may well have been the last chance for there to ever be a vaccine. I hated it. I almost threw my controller across the room in rage and frustration at being railroaded into that final decision. And that final decision, of course, leads into The Last of Us 2. Spoilers, I guess. Here be spoilers. The medical team that he gunned down at the end when they were about to operate on Ellie included a man, the doctor, who was the father of another girl, we think, who ends up seeking out Joel and the others for revenge over the intervening years. And that's what sparks all the events of The Last of Us 2, and she catches up to Joel, beats him to death with a golf club, and Ellie sets off on a task of revenge. So the first game left me feeling like nothing I'd done in the game meant anything or was worth anything. You know, you'd killed a lot of people, something about which there probably should have been a taboo in a post-apocalypse, and had really gotten nowhere. The character hadn't developed at all, hadn't gone anywhere. It was just deeply unsatisfying as an ending. I enjoyed the play of the game and seeing the world. There's the green post-apocalypse where everything is being grown over by nature and replaced and so on. Those kind of aspects I enjoyed. The gameplay I quite enjoyed, though it did get repetitive. But the story, I enjoyed the journey, but the end ruined a lot of it for me. And then we come into The Last of Us 2, and it's pretty. The gameplay is substantially the same as the first game, and therefore painfully repetitive, even coming into it years later. But seeing the landscapes and so on, that was good. It's immensely railroady, with sort of pseudo-fake free-roaming areas, but not many of them. And there are many of the same problems of clunkiness and so on, and the total lack of a character arc as well. There is no character growth. They all end up pretty much back where they started again, which is deeply unsatisfying. At least the first game had good writing to go along with the good visuals. In The Last of Us 2, the writing is extremely patchy. There are moments when it's good, mostly the flashbacks with Ellie and Joel, where it feels as well written as the old game, but by and large, for the most part, the story was meh. The banter was unconvincing, the romance was unconvincing, and it did the same thing of leaving us back where we started. Albeit sad rather than enraging at the end, just like, oh, for fuck's sake. Rather than hurling my controller across the room. I think there's a way out of this. A third game in the trilogy could save it if it brings all of these threads back together, with Abby finding the new remnants of the Fireflies, with them putting everything together, and Ellie being on board with them again, working with them again to finally produce a vaccine and save the world. Right, that could be an emotional payoff, though that would meet expectations of such a storyline, but that could make it all worthwhile, and that would bring a genuine arc to a conclusion across a trilogy. That could work. Unfortunately, I don't think they're going to do that. They may well pass things on to Abby and have her appear in a third game, or have you playing the kid that's with her, but it seems fairly unlikely, particularly if sales continue to drop off in the way that they have been. So there are problems with the story, and there's character arcs going nowhere, the repetitive gameplay, the railroading. You got the feeling they wanted to make a movie instead of a film. A movie instead of a game. And there are constant talks about a film coming out at some point, but we'll see. But this game is deeply pretentious. It definitely huffs its own farts. It's constantly ramming its message in a way that it thinks is clever, but isn't. Like, did you know killing is bad? Killing is bad, by the way. Revenge doesn't take us anywhere. Did you know revenge doesn't take us anywhere? Look, here's a dog you were playing with a squeaky toy with earlier in the other part of the game. Now you're stabbing it. Or he has recontextualizing these people you killed. Look, they're human beings with real lives and inner worlds, and they're just like you. Don't fucking care. Right? And frankly, it felt intrusive and jarring for that to happen. At least it didn't happen while you were doing it, which was something I was worried that was going to happen. Like, you'd shoot someone and then immediately get a flashback to their life, or them fishing or something, which in terms of storytelling and emotional impact might have been more effective, but would really have broken immersion. Fortunately, they didn't do that, but it still felt heavy-handed and pretentious and unwelcome, and it didn't really make any difference because these motherfuckers were out to kill you and you didn't really have a choice. How am I supposed to feel bad about killing a dog that was just going for my throat as the other character? It just doesn't work. Yeah, fuck those guys. They're assholes. They deserve to die. Frankly, it failed to humanise. And then there's all the other problems with the story. Abby is not a believable character in terms of physicality and so on. She's not animated like a woman. You've seen plenty of images of muscular women. They're still women. She looks like someone you'd taken a girl's head and grafted it onto a man's body, and that was really jarring. And the physicality of her was just not believable. It was right in that uncanny valley area. So combined with all the other issues, it fell flat. It didn't land. It didn't make sense. All kinds of aspects of it just didn't make sense within the world. There was no real internal consistency to the whole thing. And gameplay wise and environment wise, it was a mildly upgraded retread and failed to deliver on story. You can see what they were trying to do, but they were too pretentious, and it feels like there was no dissenting voice in the room with Druckmann to hone and refine the game to a point where it could have been a lot better. And again, as with the first one, good writing could have saved it, but it just wasn't there. So this attempted to subvert expectations in a genre that it may have been more welcome in, but they're aiming for a mass market game. So again, as with Star Wars, subverting expectations damages the breadth of your appeal, and it just ended up being flat and disappointing. Not outrageous, just flat and disappointing and heavy-handed and pretentious.
BB, don't worry. It's okay. you.
See the sunset. The day is ending.
I want to wrap up this examination of subverted expectations by talking about Death Stranding. Now, Kojima is an auteur who people don't dare contradict, but unlike Neil Druckmann, he seems to have some actual genuine talent. When it comes to Death Stranding, it seems like all the frustrations, all the desires to experiment that were constrained while he was within other companies, they've all kind of splurged out and been let loose. And in a similar way to The Last of Us, it's clear that he wants to make a movie, but this is very much still a game. It's just a game with movie stars in it and TV stars. And Kojima seems to have set out to subvert expectations in a similar way to these other things, but in a way that's kind of deliberately contrarian and designed to fuck with us and see how far along we'll go with Kojima because he's Kojima. There's plenty of people willing to suck Kojima's cock. I'm not going to be one of them here. Yeah, it sets out to do things deliberately that defy normal expectations of games. Right, what are the worst aspects of a lot of games? Monotonous tasks, travel, which is why we have fast travel, fetch quests. These are all the kinds of things that you expect but kind of dread in a lot of games, and Kojima has centered Death Stranding around fetch quests. Every quest is a fetch quest. Monotony. The landscape is broadly the same all over the place. It's featureless, it's monotonous, there's not a great deal out there, just this sort of scattering of symbols that other players have left, the occasional sort of bandit settlement, but for the most part it's just a bleak, stone-strewn, grassy landscape. There's no killing in it, because if you kill anybody it causes a calamitous atomic explosion, so you have to take people down non-lethally. And on top of all that, it has all the usual drawbacks of Kojima Productions, in that it's full of impenetrable nonsense and verbiage, cutscenes, and you don't really know what's going on. You just have to kind of enjoy the game for what it is, right? So these are all things that people hate in most other games, but would they go along with it for Kojima in Death Stranding? And they would, as it turns out. And there's actually less long-running cutscenes than normal, I would say. And yet, of all of these examples, I think Death Stranding is the most successful. Even though it's deliberately setting out to be contrarian and kind of annoying and to make central features of the things that are dull and boring in other games, in a way that's why it works. And maybe it's a weird context, being in the middle of a COVID epidemic as we are and all shut in at home, but the story of trying to reconnect people was quite compelling, even if the mechanics of so doing weren't. And it's quite meditative and peaceful for the most part, except when the spectral things come for you. And there's a few games like that. Minecraft is one of them, where you can just kind of play and be chill and just kind of let it wash over you. And that's how I felt a lot of the time playing Death Stranding. The landscapes reminded me of time I spent in the northwest of Scotland, on the islands. The landscape is very similar to that. Yeah, it's supposed to be America for the most part. And it's just a kind of very zen, meditative experience. Struggling across the landscape, carrying a whole load of junk, trying to keep it balanced and arranged and so on. It's just quite meditative and thoughtful. And of these three, it works. I don't think it's a game for everyone. I think it benefits enormously from the context in which we find ourselves and the goodwill that Kojima has built up. But still, out of all of these, this is the one that works. And it's the one I would have expected to work the least, because I am well aware of Kojima's drawbacks. But of these experiences, this was the most enjoyable is too strong a word, but meditative, peaceful, at ease, compelling, where I felt that I was being taken somewhere and that there was a story that was doing something interesting. I welcomed having my expectations subverted. But the thing is, Kojima, I mean, his whole career sets that expectation. And then this game set that expectation with its weird trailers and not really telling us anything. So the fulfillment was, well, we didn't really have any real expectations, and that was our expectation going into it, and that was fulfilled. That this was a weird, confusing, different game that really did move things forward. Whereas in the other two cases, it doesn't.
Did I ever tell you my real name? I wanted to. It's Amerigo. After Amerigo Vespucci, the man who discovered the continent.
I thought it was Columbus.
Except Amerigo was full of it. He lied. America is a lie.
So what's my conclusion in all of this? I think it is all about expectations. I mean, you need to set expectations. People have expectations of stories. They expect a Star Wars story of black and white, good and evil, moral right and moral wrong, Jedi, the dark side, the Force. And then if you subvert that, you're spitting in their eye. And given the precedent set by the rest of the movies, you'd have a lot of work to do to set expectations for something different. People expect a sequel to a well-received blockbuster game based centrally around a relationship and the chemistry between two characters and the good writing between two characters to revisit that. And when you kill one of those characters outright early in the game, then you destroy what people want to experience in the game, why people are coming back to it, why people want to buy it. Or if you have throughout your entire career set the expectation of doing something different and weird and off the wall every time, and then you follow that up, people are more forgiving, more willing to accept it, they go into it expecting that to happen, then it seems to work more. If you're going to subvert expectations, then you need a smaller, more sophisticated audience, or an audience that is at least aware of what you're going to do vaguely in some kind of sense. And then even then it can still fall flat. And if you wanted to subvert the expectations of that small, pretentious, sophisticated audience, the way you would subvert that would be by doing something normal, something conventional, not something strange and weird at all. Tropes, mythology, the hero of 1,000 faces, archetypes, these exist for a reason. They hook in to that primordial idea of story that we all seem to unconsciously have, that all cultures seem to have produced variations of. Avoiding tropes often doesn't work. You have to be extra skillful. And there's no shame, I think, in fulfilling expectations, in going back to the well and exploring those same tropes, because they do all exist for a reason. Something fundamental to humans as storytellers, as the storytelling ape, as information transmitters and receivers. Archetypes are shortcuts, cheat codes. They fit something universal about the human experience in some way, and that's why they're so powerful, even though they end up repeated. Perhaps because they get repeated so much. It's made me think more about my approach to stories and to game writing and so on as a result of watching these 3 examples of this issue and meditating on the idea of subversion of expectation. Yeah, it can work. I don't want to say that it can't work or it doesn't work, but it only seems to really work when you have an auteur who is genuinely talented and has the freedom to pursue their vision without any shackles whatsoever. When they are hooked on and deeply interested in what they're doing, not when they're being given the task to do it and then sort of resentfully vandalizing the place on their way out. And that's why I think Kojima worked, why Death Stranding worked, and why The Last of Us 2 didn't. Now those are both games, so a lot of it is in how you approach the game, how you choose to do things. But in The Last of Us 2 there were no meaningful choices. In The Last of Us 1 there were no meaningful choices. Death Stranding, there still weren't particularly, there was still a main story thread. But how you approach the tasks and the difficulties of negotiating the landscape, that was more open. The Last Jedi failed so utterly because that is just not the place to subvert expectations at all. That is a mythic story, that is an archetypical story, that is a story whose strength lies in the tropes and the tired ideas and the old ways of doing things, in gods and monsters, campfire tales, in the old and unsophisticated radio and movie serials. And trying to do something so radically different just fell entirely flat. And that's why things like The Mandalorian end up looking so good in comparison. Because they understand and fulfill people's expectations of Star Wars. Zang. Postmortem Studios sells a wide variety of stock art, well over 500 pieces, many of them by RPG industry veteran Brad McDevitt. These are available for you to use in your personal or professional projects, whether stories or games or anything else. Check us out at rpgnow.com.